For the record, this is the January 29th, 2020 briefing session of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining. We understand Director Baza is on the Capitol Hill, and so Deputy Director Dana.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair and Board. It's good to see you all here today. Yes, Mr. Baza and Bart Kettle, the other Deputy Director, along with our Executive Director of Natural Resources, are up speaking to our Appropriations Committee about the oil and gas audit, and that is going to take up most of their meeting this morning. So you can tune into that later on the legislative website if you're interested to see how that went and what the questions were and what the Appropriations Committee thought of the audit. So I hope that people will, if are interested, will look at that later. This morning, the first presentation that we have is from a group that talked to Chairman Gill about getting on the agenda. They have a very interesting presentation. Their company is called CultureQuantified. They're creating and improving safety culture in the oil, gas, and mining industry. And representing them is Paul Hoffman, Vice President of Learning and Development. Paul has worked in the corporate training and certification industry for over 30 years. He has built professional certification and training programs and is passionate about cultures. Paul has worked with all types of companies from startups to Fortune 100. Also here is Todd Eckenfelder. Todd is one of their lead consultants. He has worked with education institutions on bullying prevention and large and small companies to implement culture quantification and management processes for general business excellence and corporate safety. And I'll just turn the time over to them.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman and Board.
And would you make sure you talk
Get up really close?
So that it's being recorded. I get to hear what is actually on the tape, so.
Absolutely. I'm used to being a little more animated and walking around with this, so this is, bear with me being in front of the microphone. We're so excited to talk to you a little bit about culture. You know, somebody asked me not too long ago, why culture and why now? You know, culture has become a buzzword in a lot of Fortune magazines, and people are talking about culture. You have to look no further than Boeing and what's happened with the 737 MAX. If you drill down to what happened with the systemic failures with that plane and the losses that they're having, you drill down to character and culture. Ultimately, it came down to they decided to sell as an upsell vital electronics that were supposed to help keep that plane safe. So safety permeates throughout everything that we talk about. Culture is ubiquitous. We want to focus on safety. Several years ago, there was a couple of universities, 14 of them, decided that they were fed up with the price of their health insurance premiums. So they decided to self-fund or pay their own premiums so they didn't have to pay an insurance company. They were going to pay their own claims. So 14 of them got together. They formed a group. They called it the University Risk Fund Group. Now, this risk fund group operated for a couple of years, and then they found that there were some disparities between the different universities. Some universities had a lot of claims, and some had very few. And as you can imagine, the ones that had very few were wondering why they were paying for all these claims for those that had a lot. So a warm discussion started, and they figured that what they were going to do is they were going to hire a consultant to come in and figure out what was going on. So they hired us to come in. We came in, we take a look at it, and we asked every one of the universities 2 questions. Number 1, where's your safety program? And number 2, who's in charge? Who's in charge of safety? Now, from top to bottom, they all had some answers to it, but they were very different. At one end of the spectrum was University of Pennsylvania. Now, we asked them the question, where's your safety program? And they were the ones that were the most egregious with the most claims. And so they showed us a safety program that could fill this room. There was safety programs for every little things, and they had hired supervisors and managers and so many people to manage this safety program. And we thought that if that was the case, then these people would have the least. The other end of the spectrum was Dartmouth. Well, they're a college, they're a little smaller, but they had the least claims. And when we asked them for their safety program, they looked at us and said, what safety program? And then we asked them the second question, well, who's in charge of safety? And they said, well, we all are. We're in charge of safety. And what we learned from that was that you can have all the programs that you want. If you don't have the correct beliefs and values associated with those programs, if the people don't choose to follow them, they aren't worth the paper they're printed on. So the root of any safety program comes down to culture. It comes down to belief and values. What beliefs and values did they have at Dartmouth? Well, they believed that they were in charge of their own safety, not somebody else. If we asked that question at Penn, and they said Bill or Sally or someone else was in charge of safety, the managers and supervisors that they had hired. So it was kind of a pass the buck type of thing. That was really the genesis for CultureQuantified. Before that, we basically assessed and did safety programs. We got to the root of this by coming to culture and trying to figure out why some safety programs were great and some were not great. And it came down to culture. You boil it all down to character and culture. We use a diagram to kind of illustrate this. We call it a performance map. You know, most people will buy a safety program because they're required to. Regulations and things, they're required to have safety programs. People are going to look at it. What we found is that if those safety programs aren't based on correct principles, they aren't implemented very well. But to what end? What correct principles? Well, every company's looking for performance. What is their performance? What's the end goal? What are they trying to achieve? Is it profits? Is it a better widget? Is it happy employees? What's the performance goal that you're going for? Well, in order to get that, we found that you have to have a culture. Now, some people will say that you can't measure culture. Edgar Schein says you can't measure culture. You give 6 reasons why, and we vehemently disagree with that because we have a process that does that, and we do that by a couple of things. We assess a company's beliefs and values. If a company will believe the correct principles, or a person in the company believes the correct principles, then they begin to value whatever that is. Those values ultimately become their attitude. You get a bunch of characters together, and you end up with a culture. And some characters are a little more characteristic than others, but once you have a climate of attitudes, you have behaviors, and those behaviors then ultimately dictate performance. So you can measure culture by measuring beliefs and values. A good illustration of that is a company that we worked with up in Maine, Bass Shoes. Now, Bass Shoes had a real problem. They had a lot of small injuries. They had carpal tunnel, shoulder, neck, muscle strains. And their claims were going up. Their morale was going down. These people were getting injured on the floor. And so they called us in to find out and assess what the problem was. We took a look at the problem, and we realized that these people were para-athletes. They were using their bodies repetitively all day long. But one thing that they didn't do that athletes do is to prepare their bodies, stretching and doing exercise, strength building exercises. So as a remedy, we went to the management. We told them, hey, this is what's going on. This is our recommendation. They built a great program, a safety program that included stretching, these strength exercise drills. They gave it to their managers. Their managers went out to the floor and informed everybody of the new policy. A little time went by, and nobody's stretching. It wasn't cool to stretch. Nobody wanted to be seen stretching, right? And a couple of weeks more went by, still nothing. So as a business, they want something, and if you've got a problem, you can throw money at it, right? So they decided to throw some money at it. They were going to pay people to come in early to do their stretches, and they'll pay bonuses if you did it at lunch, and pay overtime if you stretched at the end of it. Still, nobody was doing it. They called us exasperated and said, we've got this program. We've told everybody believes that this is what it should do. What's going on? And they asked us to come back. So we came back, we quickly assessed what was going on, and we found a couple of influencers in the floor. The person standing next to whoever it is that everybody talks to. Those influencers influenced the culture. We grabbed those influencers and we made them mentors. Those mentors are the key to changing any culture. We gave them skills and tools to use as they went back out on the floor to help those around them change their ideas, their beliefs and values. And what happened after a couple of weeks was it went from not cool to stretch to everybody look at me because I'm stretching. And the performance that Bass Shoes had hoped to get was evident really quickly. Claims went down, morale went up, injuries started really going down quickly, just because it wasn't the program, it wasn't the money, it was the culture, it was the beliefs and values of those individuals that were there. We empowered a couple of key influential people to go and to disseminate amongst their peers the correct beliefs and values that would create performance.
Yeah. Is this on? There we go. Can you hear me? So I'm gonna pick up where Paul left off a little bit there. Has anybody ever here gone to a Jazz game? You like to go early sometimes. I like to go early to the basketball games or any sporting event. And you'll notice all the athletes, to play off of what Paul was saying, is that they go through this extensive stretching and preparation for the game. And I used to go early and watch some of these games. I remember once they were playing in the Phoenix Suns, and Steve Nash used to go out a good 45 minutes early and spend 45 minutes stretching his body in preparation for the game. And he would have never thought to go out and play without going through that preparation. And there are a lot of other analogies that we can draw between athletics and safety, especially in the industry in which you have oversight. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our relationship with Turner Industries, which is an organization that provides maintenance and general construction services for some of the largest petrochemical companies in the world, out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They had a problem, specifically their operations in Lake Charles. And the director of operations in Lake Charles, a guy named David Franks, had noticed that he had pretty good performance, pretty good safety performance. But he had all the same manuals, all the same safety programs as they had at every one of their locations all over the state of Louisiana, Illinois, I think in North Dakota. But for some reason, he had better performance there. But he couldn't articulate as to why he had better performance. And so he talked to one of his friends who was in charge of training, leadership training there, and he said, please go out and find me somebody who can measure culture. Because if we can't measure it, I can't manage it. And I'm afraid if something goes wrong, we'll lose our good performance and we'll lose money from our bottom line. And I don't want that to happen. So a guy named Daryl Hennigan went out and just did some searches on the internet about 5 or 6 years ago, and he came across our website where we claim we can measure culture. So through a series of conversations, they determined that they'd like to bring us down and spend some time training some people that would be their mentors. I want to back up a little bit. One of the most important parts of this measurement process is a survey that we've generated. And the survey is based on a couple of different things. And one of them is identifying key attributes that all world-class safe organizations have. And we've identified these attributes. So if you look at all the organizations in the world that have world-class safety, they pretty much all have these 14 attributes. So just like basketball players, or if we were to look at sumo wrestlers or ballet dancers, they all have a specific set of attributes that make them world-class, just like world-class safe organizations. And then we correlated those attributes with a set of beliefs and values. So that's what we're measuring. So when we say we can measure a culture, what we're doing is we're surveying to see what the subjective view is, and when you add them all together, it becomes a little more scientific. What the perception is of the people that work in a location, what the perception is of those beliefs and values. And the number one value in a safe organization is, why do you do safety? And this goes back to the first story that Paul told you. It's not because you have a manual that tells you so. It's not because your boss told you so. It's because you care about your safety and you care about the safety of the person you're working next to. So you do it for the right reason. And there are 10 of those values. And then together with Turner, we created more or less in education speak a curriculum that would help teach local, the employees at the various sites how they could apply these beliefs and values in their daily lives to be in compliance and to be safe. And then we would survey them from time to time so we can get kind of a perception of what the climate was like. So in essence, the culture became more by design as opposed by default, or more prescriptive than reactive. So you could, traditional safety measurement is accident reports or death fatalities on highways. It's historical, and so then programs become reactive. What we say is that if you can start to understand the bricks and mortar of what make your culture a culture, then you're more likely to be able to act, preemptively or strategically. Another story I like to tell is, or a metaphor is if you have a flu and you go to the doctor, or you have an illness and you go to a doctor, he can do a couple of different things, or she can do a couple of different things. She could just prescribe you all the antibiotics and hope one of them cures you, which I think is the general way that a lot of people do safety. They get all these programs, and they just apply them all, and they hope they work. Or you can do some diagnostic, and you can find out where some of your problems are, and then you can do it strategically. And what we're saying is if you start to measure your safety culture, you can start to apply some strategies in the existing programs you may have more strategically. Here's an example of some of the curriculum that we developed with Turner, and these come in cards, and they use these for the context of weekly culture meetings. So, and these happen at all of their locations and sites. They have numerous sites all over Louisiana, and they started with a couple of different sites where they felt like this would be sticky, sites where they felt like they would be attuned to do this right off the bat, because they didn't want any false starts. They chose right, and they had great results with a few of these locations. And again, they used these safety cards to discuss safety. And what began to happen was it became part of the fabric of their organization. And I attended one of these meetings one day. It was interesting. They were talking about one of the values, and one of the employees raised their hand and said, started talking about the gloves that they had been issued and how they had been appreciative of the gloves they had been issued, but they had just ordered one set of gloves, and they didn't fit everybody's hands, and that there had been some accidents on the site where the glove had gotten stuck in some of the machinery, and some people had lost some man-hours. And so the point behind that little story is that by placing an emphasis on discussing culture at its core, where the beliefs and values were, it was able to facilitate conversations in the real world that resulted in some changes that helped the employees in that area. This is a quote from the area president in Lake Charles, who is now actually Turner's COO, and has attributed some of his success to implementing this values-driven safety approach. So our current measurement system relies on traditional principles. Basically, it's a measurement of failures, which is true, and corresponding punitive actions rather than measuring successes and exhorting leadership. These are just a couple more examples of some of the content that we develop with Turner in our culture meetings. So right here are some numbers. Turner was nice enough to send the statistics with us that start with the 2015 year when we start collaborating with Turner. The most important, Control L, right? Command L. There we go. So the most important numbers here, I believe, are right there. So these are recordable man hours between incidents. So as you can see at the top, and the total man hours is the first column after the year. So in 2015, they had roughly 5 million total man hours of work. There was a spike in 18 because they started a new operation that was massive. It was for Sasol in Lake Charles. It was a brand new refinery, and their man hours increased and spiked. And the reason why I mentioned that is that they had to hire a lot of new people. And as you can see, there was some a spike in total recordables, and they hadn't yet implemented values-driven safety and weekly culture meetings on that location. But within a year or so, those recordable man hours increased, and then the hours between recordable injuries more than tripled. And in large part because, and this is according to David Frank and the people there, was because of values-driven safety. So you might be able to suggest if you apply this, you might have a tripling of your man hours. And all those, as we know, those lost man hours hurt your bottom line. So they were able to retain more of their profits in that location. So in conclusion, hopefully you've taken away 3 things from this, is that predicts what we do, values-driven safety and measuring and managing safety predicts performance based on your culture. 2, it encourages individual accountability. Like I said, through our weekly culture meetings and through the mentors, this reaches everybody on a job site. It's not something that starts and is implemented by just somebody in charge of safety. Back to the Dartmouth and the Penn story, this process encourages everybody to be involved with safety. And lastly, it improves safety across the board, in large part because of how it reaches everybody. And that's the end. Thank you very much for your time, and we're now open for questions if there are any.
Thank you very.
Thank you. I learned about these folks. They're out of New York, come all the way out here, and for that we thank you. I remember we were at the company I worked at trying to figure out how to measure culture and the difficulty that was for them. Yet it was one of the 4 or 5 key factors when they looked at a major set of issues. And so because of the culture component of this, I thought it might be worthwhile. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about it, but when I say culture, I don't mean it just in terms of safety. When we were asked to look at issues, you had resources, you had people, you had processes, and you had culture. Whether that's Six Sigma or can be something else, the inability to measure culture or to deal with culture, or the success if you could deal with culture, was a big thing in terms of actually getting results. So I hope this has been worthwhile for you. Any questions from the board? Go ahead, Rich.
Thanks for that. A lot of companies that I've worked with, they're very focused on the tools of safety and health. That's the procedures, the standard operating procedures, the org charts, the flow charts of what happens when this happens. And then there's also the culture piece, and sometimes you over-focus over here, it distracts you from over here. What, in your experience, what is sort of the right balance between maintaining those tools and processes and focusing on the broader culture?
Yeah, I'd answer that by saying this process is culture sensitive, meaning you can have an organization that has a lot of programs and services and others that don't, and it can work for both. This isn't necessarily a new program. Hopefully it enhances all the current programs that an organization has. So it helps you be more prescriptive. It's really, it helps an organization focus specifically on culture, and hopefully if they emphasize that, whatever program and service they have, tools for safety, it'll only enhance those. It'll help you use them more prescriptively. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. I guess a follow-up. sometimes you can overburden an organization with too many tools and processes. That's one reason I was asking the question is, if you get the culture right, I assume you don't need so many checklists and sheets.
The rest takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Right. One of the examples that we like to use is customer service. A lot of people surveys right now are huge, and if you're Qualtrics, it's where you're making your money, right? Customer service surveys. How did we do? Well, if you have your culture right, the surveys don't matter as much because you know that your people that are interacting with them are taking care of the customers because that's what they believe and value. They value the fact that they're taking care of them. And so even though you're going to measure it, if you weighted, you said, where's the balance? I would always balance it more on culture than the program. Because if you go back to the Dartmouth example, they didn't have a program, at least not one written down, right? It may have been implicit, but they did have the right culture, and that culture was able to bring them through not having the program.
Yeah, I'd also add, when we started doing this 20 plus years ago, we thought that this would be a great tool for companies that had really bad culture. But we learned that that was not right. And so the right balance is a company that's really curious and fascinated and acknowledges the importance of getting the culture right. That's part of the reason why we did a lot of work with Turner is that David Franks was already fascinated with the importance of culture. So most of our clients have been companies that already understand the importance of culture, but they just don't know how to wrap their head around how to maintain it. And so the balance, I agree with Paul. I think the balance, if you have to choose one or the other, I think the emphasis on culture is the most important thing because I think it lays the foundation for the application of any program. You can have a fantastic program, but if all your employees don't see the value in being safe, the program isn't going to work. So I think the culture is the most important thing. That's what I would tell a potential client, and I have. So,
Thank you.
Other questions from the board members? Anyone in the audience that'd like to ask a question? Seeing none, then thank you very much. We sure appreciate your traveling out here and letting us know about this.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Okay, we're on to briefing item number 2, the oil and gas program inspection prioritization.
Yes, this will be presented by Mark Gwynn, one of our oil and gas inspectors, on behalf of Bart Kettle, who is up on the hill and unable to present this morning. This is something that the oil and gas program's been working on for over a year. They just went live.
We started actually working on it about May.
Okay, well, anyway, it's been a long time in the making. I think it just barely went live. There's still some things to work out, and once it's working for the oil and gas program, the minerals program plans to try to implement some of these same techniques. So as you're watching the presentation, keep that in mind, that we would like to use some of these same things in the minerals program in the future. So I'll let Mark go ahead and take over.
Reason it started at the wrong slide there.
Thank you, Mark.
Welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about this program. It's something that we've spent a lot of time working on, and we're glad to be able to come here and show it in a kind of a brief format. It's a big program, so it's a little hard to get everything into it here in a short time, but I'm going to do my best to kind of cover what we've got here. Let's see. Command L, right? So this is why is it still showing the bottom stuff on there? Is that all right? So, all right. Well, as Dana said, we went operational yesterday. This is a partnership that's very fortunate in the timing for us. Is in the way of a little bit of historical background. The idea behind a program like this has been kind of floating around the division for several years, and the Groundwater Protection Council also was kind of looking at a similar sort of idea. So in late 2018, they went to Jim Milne and they asked him to kind of put together a proof of concept version. Fortuitously, he chose to look at the GIS data sets, real data sets that were available to him in Duchesne County. He only looked at GIS data, geographical data, but that was able to form a partnership with us kind of just before the audit process got started. And we, with some changes to it and adding some other components to it, were able to bring the thing into an initial testing stage and right about the time that the audit results were released. Again, that was a very helpful thing because a number of the things that were highlighted in the audit are addressed by this tool. Should be said that this tool that went operational yesterday is the beginning of the process here. We knew that there were a lot of other aspects to this that we would want to build into it, given the time that given time, but that weren't feasible to get in the first phase. So there's a number of parts of this that we're going to keep adding to as we go. So the real focus of this program right now is that our inspectors statewide have around 16,000 wells we're responsible to look at. Some of the types of inspections we do are kind of, they're either spur of the moment due to some kind of an emergency or an incident, or there's some things that are semi-scheduled. In between those things, we have routine compliance inspections that we are trying to operate and do with a pretty high workload. So the idea behind this is that we can allow our inspectors to augment their knowledge of the areas where they work and use their expertise combined with a tool that helps them to focus and get to the right place at the right time, meaning those wells that for some reason or another, whether it be some kind of ongoing compliance issues, or the location of the well near population centers or environmental type centers becomes an issue, and so we want to be able to get to those wells and prioritize on them. So I'm going to just kind of go quickly into how this process works. As I mentioned, the test version looked at kind of geographical factors. We didn't want to stop there. We wanted to add some of these operational factors, such as compliance history with a given well, the age of that well, the time since the last inspection was completed on it. Each of those categories, those basic categories, break down into some sort of subcategories that get scored, and we'll kind of see that here when we get a little further along. Some of the geographic factors, again, there's sub-factors in there, but we look at groundwater, surface water, population, and wildlife. There's 6 basic steps that go into designing and making this process work for the geographic factors, and I'm going to look at these individually. The process is pretty similar for the operational criteria, but there's a few steps that we don't need to take there, so I'm going to kind of focus on what happens after we solve some technical difficulties, some of which might be because I'm not used to using Apple products.
Art, can I ask you a question while he's doing that?
Certainly.
How many inspectors do you have?
Right at the moment, with Dennis Ingram retiring last month, as far as dedicated inspectors, we've got just 5.
16,000 wells and 5 inspectors.
5 inspectors. That being said, we have some people in the Salt Lake office that do some of our inspections as well, but dedicated inspectors out of the Price and Vernal Field offices right now is 5. To help with that, we're actually in the process of hiring a number of additional people, which should help some of those things that were highlighted with during the audit. Okay, looks like we're fixed here. and got rid of that stuff at the bottom, which is helpful. So we've got these basically 6 steps. The operations side, we can skip some of those as we go along there. And so I'm going to mostly focus on how the geographic process works here. What I do want to say is that some of these components are more important than others, and so they have a higher weight. So on the operational side, a compliance history and the duration since the last time a well was inspected, or the driving forces in there. If a well's had a lot of compliance issues, then we certainly want to be able to look at it more often and have it become a higher priority. On the geographic side, groundwater, surface water, population really are kind of the big things. At the moment, we have some components of wildlife, such as sage grouse management areas, that aren't really scored, but they're there informationally so that an inspector can look at those and make sure that we're paying attention to those types of things. All right, so with the first step we go with the geographic side, we've got to assemble the GIS layers that are available and that are useful to us. That took some process because there's a lot of things out there. Some of them are useful, some of them are not as useful. Some of them needed to be modified a little bit, and some of them were okay. Remember that the geographic things don't change very often, but they do change periodically. Data sets are updated or new data sets become available. And so we built the system so that we can bring those, can easily integrate new layers and new data sets as we go along. Obviously, the operational factors change from day to day as our inspectors perform inspections and write compliance items and so forth. So the first thing we need to do in step 2 is we have and as an example, we have a perennial stream there, and we created a 100-foot buffer around that, and that becomes one scoring criteria, and then a 100 to 300-foot buffer becomes a second criteria. Over here, we've got an example of domestic water wells, and they have a quarter-mile buffer around them. This also illustrates that we may have multiple wells in an area, and so those will also, the count will add to how we score things. All right, step 3 is we're going to draw the well data and the location data out of our existing RBDMS database, and we'll kind of match that location, that well location, with the different data sets. So in this case, address points, stream buffers, lakes, water wells, and in this example, using alluvium because there's the soil can be a factor in that. The two intersect operations we look at is, one, does it intersect any of these kind of things? Like in this case, this well, there's an oil well within a quarter mile of water well. And then, as I mentioned, there's a count of 3 water well polygons that are intersected by that oil and gas well. So those are things that we need to look at. Step 4, we're going to transfer all this GIS intersect data back into our regular existing database. And then in step 5, we'll look at the GIS intercept results will be combined with a score method table that we drafted and built, and that will kick out a score results table. And then you can see, I think we can all see where we're going to go with this. Now we're going to have an output. We're going to put out a graphic display of it, and we have the capability also to look at a tabular result in an Excel spreadsheet form. This is just an example output into ArcGIS. The green dots in this example are low priority. The yellow are a little higher, and up here, just move very well. And up here, the red dots are the higher priority wells in this particular example. So what does it really look like now that it's been released? Our format that we get the system on currently is the existing and publicly available Data Explorer program that's available on our website. But this new data that was added to it, you have to have a proper login in here to get it. And this is what the basic output gives us here. So this is the Monument Buttes area, Mighton's about 7 or 8 miles up this way. We combine, as I mentioned, we've got the geographic and the operational side of things, and we can look at each of those types of data individually, or we combine them into an overall priority. And this map actually uses the overall priority. So when we combine those things, I'm going to look at one example that's highlighted here in pink. This Wells Draw well up here, it has an overall priority of 2, an operations priority of 3, and that's primarily driven because there's been no compliance issues with this well. It's been inspected relatively recently, so it's a pretty low priority there. But it's within about 300 feet of a stream, of a mapped stream channel. So that gives it a geographic priority of 1. So if we plug this matrix, if we plug in the geographic priority of 1, operations priority of 3, it gives us a overall priority of 3 for that location. There's some things that we can still draw out of this map, even though it's using the combined scores. And one is that these mainly orange dots through here, so these fairly high priority 2s, we can tell that even though these are the combined scores, that these are generally driven by the geographic features there in these drainage channels. Likewise, up here where we have some agricultural areas, those have groundwater components and surface water components. There are some homes in there, so there's a population component. So that drives some of those to be the higher priority wells up there. But we can also look at a few things, and even off of this, and draw out why they're scored the way they are. From the operations side, these should all be roughly the same color, and these down here that are a lot of reds along with these blues, those are due to either compliance issues or time since inspection. So that drives some of those differences in there, why we have kind of more of a mix in there. Okay, so where do we stand? Now, we went operational with this yesterday. In this current release, the goal of this is to automate a lot of the work that we do. Current things that we're looking at being able to add here are some navigational functions so that our inspectors can know where the red dots are and can navigate their way out there with GIS features. Having a dashboard that will allow them to look at some information. It'll also help us to gather some statistical information that's hard to capture otherwise. We're working on integrating some electronic forms so that our inspectors can enter that data right there in the field, and rather than making a bunch of notes, coming back to the office, having to get into the database and enter that information. Again, we can get some of the metrics. We're going to work on integrating some compliance tracking in here so that it's a little easier to track compliance. That was a big issue in the audit. Also some bonding and permitting type processes, and the sky's really the limit. So that's just et cetera. So really, we've already kind of addressed a lot of the audit findings, and we plan to be able to meet more of them and exceed some of those things that we want to do. So we're looking for kind of a continuous improvement with this. And I want to finish with just a snapshot of our inspection status from just a few days ago for wells that are not plugged. So these are active wells. So in the priority 1, there's 656. Priority 2, there's just under 3,300. Priority 3, about 2,600. And here graphically, and this is one of the things we'll be able to easily bring up with this dashboard, is where this plots. So priority 1, about 10% of this group of wells are priority 1. 50%, 51% are priority 2, and priority 3 make up about 39%. And with that, that's kind of a real quick overview of this project, and we're hoping to keep building on it. I'm open for questions at this point.
Board members, questions? Rich?
3 quick questions. On compliance, is that rating based on the compliance history of only that specific well, or the compliance history of the operator? You know, if compliance history hasn't been so good, 2 miles away.
Right. So during the development process, we had some discussions on that. As it stands, it's built on a given well. There certainly are some arguments for looking at so we'll just say quote unquote bad operators, but that is not built in this way to our prioritization. So if they're only bad with one of their wells and their other 75 or 100 wells, whatever, or they're okay with, then we're only really worried about that one specific well and how well they remediated and took care of the compliance issues.
What's the relative weighting between the operational and the geographic priority? Is it just 50-50?
No, if we go back, the operational side, which is here on the vertical, has a little heavier weighting. So those operational features will always be the drivers in the overall priority. But again, we want to be able to look at some of the other issues. So if an inspector says, well, why is this a high priority well? They have the capability, and it's hard to see down here, but you can bring it up here and look at the different subcomponents and where the scores were there. And that way the operator can kind of tease out why a given well is a priority that it is.
Last question, looking at that map, how many wells can a typical inspector visit in a day if they're geographically lumped like all the reddish wells on the lower central portion of that map?
So you kind of hit on the one part of that. In the southern part of the state, from Price down to San Juan County, it's a lot more difficult. The wells are spread out there in long distances. In the Uinta Basin, which is where this example's from, where they're pretty well spaced, obviously we could hit a lot more. And I'm just going to kind of pull a rough number out there because there's a lot of variables there. But say maybe 30 to 50 on a good day if they're closely grouped, and there's no major components there. Might be able to get a good inspector might be able to get that many.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? On the left, okay, Steve?
So I'm interested, Mark, in with all the priority 3 wells, over time and age, those wells can change just from the age of the equipment, and they may never get visited, but there's so many of them. Is there an age component that you look at with these wells and in affecting their priority? Because your GIS wells that are your geographic wells that are priority 1, they're always going to demand the inspectors checking them, but these other priority 3, over time, something's bound to happen to them.
That's right, and that's a good point. So yeah, if you have a well that's a high geographic priority, obviously it's going to get a little more looking at. But if we have something that's way out in the middle of nowhere, there's no real groundwater there, no population centers, it's going to be a low geographic priority. And because of that, we do have an age of the well and the facility component. It's a little bit lower driver than time since inspection, but the time since inspection is still going to drive that. If we haven't seen it for a while, it'll start to kick it up in the priorities, so that we don't leave those ones that are sitting out there for forever, for a long period of time. And with our new people coming on, we hope to be able to kind of catch up with some more of these from where they are.
On the right side?
So you must have prioritized up till now. How have you? Has it just been time since last inspection, or have you had something informally prioritizing your inspections?
Up until this point, it's mostly just been an operator's knowledge, an inspector's knowledge of the area, and really just trying to keep track of it in his or her own brain where they need to go. As we released this yesterday and looked at, had one of our other inspectors, one new inspectors look at it, he said, wow. He's had little bits and pieces of how this is going to work, but when he got to really examine it, he said, wow, this can really help me keep track of all these wells I need to visit and when I visit them and everything else. So we have high hopes, and I think we have good reason to have high hopes for the program.
Mr. Brown?
Mark, I don't know if you're the right person to answer this for the division, but it seems to me that this tool could be beneficial in siting wells as well as after the fact. Do we use similar factors in determining if we issue the authority to site a well and spud a well and drill a well?
That's a very good question, and actually, my primary job within the division is doing the pre-sites on new wells, rather than inspections of existing wells. This will actually be a help in that. So when I typically go out and I look at a location, I look at a bunch of the factors out there, and I'll come back and look at a bunch of the GIS data available for that location. With this function, it will kind of automatically look at all those geographic features that go into that, and they'll spit them out for me, and I can save a lot of time without looking at each individual layer at a given location. So that is another one of the things down the road that we're going to be, or, we hope to be able to use with this. Maybe a year or two down the road before we get that particular function built into it, but we intend to do so.
Other questions? So it looks like that you've gone from a system that is left up to the inspector to decide which wells to look at to a automated, not necessarily an automated system that could prioritize inspections based on the most important need. So if you had 656 priority 1 inspections, how long would it take for 5 inspectors to get through that list?
I'm not sure I can give a very good answer for that, based on geographic distances and other priorities and things. If we can focus on them, and they're generally kind of closely grouped, and we made a real blitzing effort. I can say, I don't know, maybe a couple of months or something, or a month. But it's hard for me to really quantify a good answer to that question, unfortunately. But I would like to say, the inspectors have always known that we have some specific goals for how often to inspect them, so that it hasn't been completely that they've just been whichever well, whenever. But this helps to keep track of them and get our inspectors where they need to be, when they need to be there, for these higher priority wells.
Thank you very much. I thought that was very very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anything else on this?
Yes, I have a couple of things under other. First off, I'd like to mention that the first bill tracking spreadsheet for this year's legislative session was sent out by Natasha Balliff yesterday. There's not much on it right now. There are quite a few bills that we know about that are protected at this stage and will not show up on that tracking sheet until they become public. So keep an eye on that, and if you have any questions, ask Natasha, but she will continue to update that spreadsheet and get it to everyone so that you can know what's happening in the legislature. Now is also the time, if anyone wants to know, to get in your Environmental Excellence Award nominations. They're due February 21st, and this year we've been invited by the Utah Mining Association and the Utah Petroleum Association to join their annual Safety Award presentation on April 24th. We've decided to go ahead and do that. It will be held at Little America. This gives us the benefit of a larger venue and audience and more prominence for our awards. And so it does speed up the schedule a little bit. The due date for the nominations is February 21st, and then the board will be discussing at the very next week at the hearing which ones they want to hear come present. The presentations will have to take place in March, and then the actual award ceremony will be in April. So if anyone's interested in nominating, they do need to be on time this year, and February 21st is the date. And then lastly, is Kevin Annenson here, Mitch Mayo? Yeah, so Mitch Mayo has requested on behalf of his client, XCL Resources, that they be allowed to introduce themselves to the board. They acquired Axia Energy in December of 2019, and Mr. Kevin M. Annenson, Vice President of Business Development and Land, and it looks like they may have someone else. I'll let them just introduce themselves to the board and that's all they wanted to do.
Members of the board, I appreciate the time. I know you're busy today, but XCL's new here. They're going to be doing a lot before the board, I would imagine, before too long. And I thought it was best, since they were here today on a field visit, a site visit, for them to come in. They just wanted to introduce themselves. I know there's a tight schedule. If you have more questions or would like to discuss, feel free. But I'm going to turn the time over quickly to Kevin Annenson here to kind of give you the rundown. Sure.
Thanks, Mitch. So like Mitch said, my name's Kevin Annenson, and we're with XCL Resources. I'm our VP of Business Development and Land. We just closed on the asset from at.a.m. So we're temporarily under a transition agreement. So we'll be taking over operations and everything starting in March, although we've got a lot of our folks in place already. We are backed by NCAP Investments. It's a private equity group out of Houston, which is also where we're headquartered. We also have a Roosevelt office. So when we put together our team, we realized that we had to put together a team that could actually develop an asset. We knew that this asset was not one that you could go drill one well and flip it. So Axia did a great job of discovering where the rock was. And so when we put our team together, we put together a team that had extensive background in actually being able to develop. I recently came from a company called Oasis Petroleum. It's in the Bakken, and I spent about 10 years there. And when I left, I was managing the Bakken Land Group. And then we also brought two of our engineers who were also sitting in the back. They were interested to come along as well. So we wanted to be respectful of y'all's time, but also wanted to come say hi and be here when we didn't need anything. And Mitch thought it'd be a great idea, but also wanted to introduce Josh and let him kind of give a little background of himself as well. And then if you guys had any questions, we can go ahead and answer those. If not, we can leave some cards and you guys can reach out. That way we're respectful of this time that we have with you guys.
Thank you.
Josh Sigler, Vice President of Geology at XCL Resources. As Kevin mentioned, we're a young company, but we're not a hasty company. Over the last year, we kind of performed an exhaustive search of the United States, looking for an asset that was really met the criteria we're looking for in an asset to develop. And we looked multiple places, from the Bakken to the Permian, and found that the Uinta Basin really had the characteristics we were looking for. As we've been out there, we've seen, not only that it's a great place to develop oil and gas, but it's a diverse place. It has a lot of different great characteristics to it, from the natural scenery to the people in many different aspects. And we're really excited to not only develop the resource and be good stewards of the resource for the state and the fee mineral owners, but also and federal owners, but also to be good stewards of the land and work with you guys in partnership to make sure that we're doing all the right things. So we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. Questions from board?
So did you buy all of Axia Energy or just certain properties?
We bought all of Axia Energy's properties in Utah. I think they still have a small asset in Texas, but as far as Utah, we've bought all of their properties.
So it's a property acquisition, but not the corporate entity itself?
That's correct.
Okay.
Is Adam Sayers involved in your new company?
He is not.
Thank you.
Other questions? Gordon?
Oh, welcome to Utah.
Thank you.
I live out there in Duquesne, and so good to put a face with the name. I think I'll get the acronym right. XCL?
That's correct.
So in general, what are your plans? 1 rig, 2 rig? Are you evaluating that? What's your...
I mean, it's a great question, and I'll let Josh chime in as well. Currently, there is 1 rig running. We do believe we need to walk before we run, so we definitely want to be respectful of all the correlative rights. We want to ensure that we're developing it correctly. So by doing that, like I said, we're a team that's built to develop. Therefore, we want to do some spacing tests to ensure that we're drilling the rock correctly. So that's kind of our first goal. Like I said, we just closed in December, so we're still putting together our plan. But what I would say very high level is we wouldn't put together a team that had the development experience that we have if we weren't planning on doing a full development. I think the goal would be to at some point ramp up to, 2, 3 rigs in the future. But as you know, that goes with a bunch of different factors, spacing, commodity prices, everything else. So I think that's kind of the high-level answer. Josh, did I miss anything?
No, I think you really hit it all. I mean, I think honestly, it is about doing what's right, both on obviously the financial side for any company, but also what's right in terms of being able to not destroy value by not getting good recoveries, by working too fast to try to move into a full development mode. So we'll test some things first, and then we'll move into hopefully with success on those tests, as well as being able to build out a little bit more infrastructure to make sure that we're able to continue to realize good prices, but also have as best and minimal impact on the residents of Duchesne and Uinta County as we can. We're going to work toward that.
Yeah, Axia did a good job. We really liked Axia in lots of ways, and so just hope that you can continue on with a lot of those good things. Just one other comment: have you been in contact with the railroad folks and had some conversations there? And has that happened yet? If not, I just encourage you to do that, because that's something we're excited about out there. But there's got to be production increases to justify it, and so just wanted your thoughts there.
Yeah. So first, on Axia, we've respected Axia. I mean, they've done such a great job, and so we've obviously been in contact with those guys. And part of why we did the transition services is to, make sure we follow in their footsteps. And, we would probably say that we may, like I said, we're built to develop. We'll have more staff, so I think that's where we'll be a little bit different than those guys. But as far as everything else, I mean, we can't say enough about them. On the rail side, our CEO and we have a marketing director who's probably better for those questions, but we knew before we bought the asset that one of the main questions and one of the big concerns was going to be, how do you get the crude out? What do you do? And so we definitely studied those, so we have been in talks with those. Those are probably better questions for those two folks, but we do realize that, that's how you really improve the asset. That's how you get costs down, by doing those different things to close those differentials. But yes, we are definitely on top of that. Great question.
Other questions? Well, thank you. It's been good to have that presentation. Yes, please leave your business cards if you wouldn't mind, and give those to Julianne, the board secretary, and then she'll have that taken care of. Mitch, you know how to do all that. All right.
Thanks for your time.
But yes, welcome. We're open for business. Right now, we believe we're the most predictable and responsible board out there. We're gonna have a lot of different states asking us how we do what we do, and so we're trying to get that, let you know the rules of the game before you play. We think that's very helpful, and with that, thank you very much. Back to you, Dana.
There's nothing of note under number 4, next month's agenda and calendar, so I will just conclude the divisions portion of the briefing. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the final item on our briefing session, and that is an opportunity of anyone with the public that would like to address our board on a matter of our jurisdiction. Is there anyone that would like to address us at this time? Seeing none, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back and start our agenda.